Today we're going to talk about operational excellence by understanding lifecycle patterns. We'll start with this mental model. Think of this area as representing the ongoing operations of your business. This little area is where we onboard new things as they come in, and there's a corresponding area where we offboard things when they're no longer part of our business. For example, here's office buildings. There's a bunch of them out there, and eventually somebody picks one and decides we're going to buy it. There's a list of things we have to do to onboard that property into our portfolio, and we'll think of that generally as a checklist. Part of our ongoing operations are going to be things like inspections and quality assurance to make sure that the asset meets standards. It could be a property inspection or an audit or safety or office standards, but we'll think of that also as a checklist. We'll also have to keep track of tasks and requests for help. It could be a work order or a customer service request or preventative maintenance activities. So we need to provide for task and project management. Eventually the property leaves the portfolio, and there's a somewhat shorter checklist to complete to make sure it's properly offboarded. Now, we don't just have one asset, we have many. So part of ongoing operations is to provide for people to be able to look down and see and understand things like what assets do we have, who's associated with them, what are the tasks, and so forth. We could think of those as reports. This model works not just for physical assets, but for many other things, like people in the organization, or companies that could be customers or vendors or partners, or things like systems, equipment, and devices. This basic life cycle pattern applies to almost everything in the organization. As applied to an office building or a new site, we have things like property takeover and inspections, work orders, property reporting, and then disposition. The first and last step are pretty similar, so we'll combine them and look very carefully at what it takes to provide for this life cycle in your business. The first two steps require checklists. We use a 6-point scale to evaluate checklists. The first question is, does it even exist? You get a point just for having it. Then we look at the content and ask, is it comprehensive? Do we have a way to always keep it current? And is it easily available to everyone who needs it? A really great checklist will automate tasks and give us some reportable insights. Moving on to tasks and ticketing systems, what we're looking for here is pretty similar. Does the task list exist? Is it connected to data about the organization? Does it capture updates automatically and provide multiple ways to create new tasks or input updates? Clear accountability tells us who's responsible for what, and we want reportable insights as usual. Not surprisingly, effective tracking begins with actually having a report or a list. We want it to be available to everybody who needs it, and to show how that asset relates to others. We also want to know who's connected to it in various roles, and see the tasks that are associated with it. How do we cover this life cycle for the many important things in an organization? Your first impulse might be to consider these things horizontally, with each area having its own discrete process. But we get much better results when we use pattern-based thinking to handle each one of these life cycle stages vertically. We get good at each step, and then we apply it across the entire organization. Now let's take these basic requirements and apply our 6-point scoring system to see how a typical company does. There's no denying that these things happen in almost every organization. And some things like IT help desk are usually handled very well. Areas like CRM and customer service are usually pretty good, and people tend to track their expensive assets. But after that, the scores tend to kind of go down. If we look closely at a company and see how they're doing, there's a lot of opportunity. Stemmons Enterprise allows us to do all of these things with a common set of tools, so we're scoring 6s across the board. We all know that there's a lot more going on than this in your organization. We can start with lifecycle patterns and extend it into many other areas of the organization. With this foundation in place, Stemmons can go up the value chain and help you structure other areas of freeing up time to focus on things like strategic initiatives, growing the organization, and of course, innovating. And that's how we build operational excellence using lifecycle patterns.